Thank you for your interest in this presentation on one of my favorite topics, social marketing research. I'll provide a summary of my latest book on a practical guide to conducting social marketing research. I wrote this book because after completing my book on 2023, Success in Social Marketing, 100 Case Studies from Around the Globe, it was clear most of these cases were successful due to marketing research. And yet, as Jennifer Tabanico stated in the foreword to the book, accessible guidance on conducting and applying research has been scarce. For each of the 10 steps in a traditional strategic planning model, it will outline research objectives, common methodologies, and provide a case example revealing that benefit of the research. Very quickly, the 10 steps we'll be looking at. Step number 1, what is our purpose and focus? Analyze the situation, select the audience, determine objectives including behavior, understand the audience, craft a positioning statement, develop 4 Ps strategies, and determine evaluation plans, set budgets, and write implementation plan. So beginning with step 1, the issue. What is the wicked problem the plan will address is probably going to be something in the area of public health, safety and injury prevention, environmental threat, or community engagement. The major issue that will be a focus for research at this step is, what is the focus for this plan? And the common research questions that you're going to use to explore are the following. What are potential ways to alleviate this issue? You can use secondary data, publications, concerns highlighted by governmental agencies. It might be a question about what option is most likely to lead to a campaign with the highest potential behavior change impact, using secondary data, research studies, noting impactful behavior change examples. And then which option has the greatest funding potential and support? Might find that out by outreach to colleagues, management, and potential funding and likelihood of support. An example of illustrating a research to determine the focus, let's go for gun deaths here. With over 100 Americans dying every day on average from gun injury, 400 mass shootings every year averaging more than 1 a day, and 50 school shootings every year averaging almost 1 a week, with 60% of gun deaths being suicides. Why safe storage as a focus? Because 44% of Americans have at least 1 gun in their home, 63% of gun owners have at least 1 gun never locked up, 40% of gun owners have 1 unlocked and loaded. So 20% and more than that homes have 1 gun that's unlocked and loaded. Over 80% of firearm suicides among children and youth under 18 involved a family member's gun. Almost half of school shooters, there was a stolen gun from a family. 96% of the stolen guns are from private citizens. On to step 2, where we determine what are our major internal strengths to maximize, weaknesses to minimize, and what are the external opportunities to leverage threats to prepare for. This is what our research needs to help us understand. The most common questions to answer those questions are, what resources are available that can be accessed and allocated to this effort? A methodology of internal review of budget and staff time allocations. What about for weaknesses? What resources are needed that are not currently available? We get that by reviewing with internal staff and partners of potential resources that might be negotiated. And what external publics would be supportive of this effort, one that we could leverage? One-on-one interviews with key funders might help us learn that. And finally, what are the threats we have that we need to explore? Are there currently other campaigns already addressing this effort that we would compete with? And we would do internet searches and outreach to colleagues aware of similar efforts. An example of taking advantage and being inspired by a SWOT analysis was one in Peru, where they were trying to reduce the Zika disease. And the strengths that they wanted to maximize included recent experiences in Brazil and other places. Weaknesses they wanted to minimize were all the unknown related to the best ways to limit the spread and levels of distrust of federal government. Opportunities to take advantage of included awareness of the mosquito season had come early that year, and threats to prepare for were residents used to coexisting with mosquitoes, and threats regarding Zika would discourage the tourism. The results of doing this analysis and creating a campaign based on it was reported by WHO that lower levels since 2018 there in Peru. Our next research step is to find out who will this campaign prioritize for behavior change. It begins with segmenting the population, evaluating on a variety of factors, and then selecting one for this particular campaign effort. Important research questions to get answered are, what is the greatest need? Based on size and problem incidence of all the sectors they're looking at, which one has that particular incidence of greatest need? What is their greatest readiness for action? And this may come from a review of prior efforts and primary research quantitative survey. Then we want to look at which one might be the less costly to reach in terms of communications. And we could look at existing studies, statistics, and internal assessments. And then which is the best match for the organization? We could determine some of that by internal interviews and data assessments. A case example of the power of using research to determine that priority audience was one in youth suicide in Washington State in 2016, conducted by a variety of organizations, including C+C. In background, the suicide was the second leading cause of death among teens 15 to 19 in this time. And among 10th graders, 20% considered suicide in the past year, 17% had a plan, and 10% attempted. Who are we going to influence this issue? One-on-one interviews with high school youth determined this priority audience to be the most influential. A friend of a classmate who seems very depressed, hopeless, or usually unangry, and says things like, I wish I weren't alive. What's the point of living? Nobody cares about me. In other words, the friend of the suicidal youth. And for step 4, selecting a behavior, will be inspired by research to select that behavior that will have the greatest score on impact, willingness, measurability, and market opportunity. Common questions to select that behavior include things like, what relative impact would each of the potential behaviors have on a campaign purpose? Secondary data indicating potential value relative to the social issue. What about, for each potential behavior, what is the willingness to act? Survey research for the priority audience would help determine that likelihood of adoption. And what portion of the priority audience is not currently engaged in this behavior? Survey research with the priority audience will also determine that. And are there currently other campaigns already focused on this? Doing exploratory research will determine that. One example is in Washington State in the November of 2014. It was rated having the #1 property crime ranking in the United States. Soon after this was published, I was at a Rotary meeting and the chief of police asked me whether or not social marketing couldn't do something about this. And so I said absolutely and met with him. I was able to review burglary residential history over the past many years and determined without a doubt that about 41% of the burglaries, home burglaries, had an unlocked door or window, 80% there was no one home, and 65% of this occurred during the day. All of this revealed from that data. And this led us to priority audience of residential home occupants, usually away during the day or the week, not always locking their doors or windows. We conducted a survey of the community to determine what were their major barriers to doing this. Why wasn't this happening? We learned very important things. Barriers, 42% said, I feel safe. 33%, I forget to check. And what would make it more likely you would do this? Show me credible data. Share real stories. Help me remember to do this. And let me hear all of this from the police. What we did was develop a door hanger that was distributed to all of the households, residents on the island. And what it did was brand a campaign, lock it or lose it. And on the flip side of the door hanger, it gave all the statistics relative to home burglaries and how they were caused. In addition to that, we were lucky that our local newspaper that highlighted this, with one reading, a 56-year-old woman and said that unknown suspects burglarized her residence at the 4000 block on 92nd Avenue, stealing about $3,000 worth of items. The point of entry, exit, appeared to be an unsecured kitchen window. Just emphasizing this. For step number 5, audience insights. Research is there to identify for our priority audience their barriers, desired benefits, motivators, influencers, and competition. We need research to help identify these. Several questions are common to determine these insights. For barriers, it's what are reasons you're not likely to do this or behavior or haven't done it in the past. For benefits, what do they say would be in it for them to do the behavior? For motivators, what could someone say to you, give you, show you, or do for you that would make it more likely? And then in terms of influencers, who would they be most likely to be persuaded by? and then in terms of competition, what behavior are they currently doing instead of, and why does this appeal more? These can all be determined using a mixed method approach, where we begin with qualitative methods to identify the range of each of these potentials, and then a closed-ended quantitative survey to actually prioritize them. An example of a product that was inspired by the audience insights was one developed by American Society for Public Cruelty to Animals. And this is given the fact that 4,000 dogs and cats are euthanized every day according to the 2004 data. They developed a program, it actually could be done online, called Meet Your Match, where you answered a question for potential adopters to determine their desires, and then a questionnaire for staff to fill out to categorize the animals that are there. Shelters using this experienced 40% to 60% gains in adoption. In step number 6, based on audience insights in step number 5, we want to fill in the following statement based on research. What do we want our priorities to see the desired behavior as? We might describe it in terms of adjectives, overcoming barriers, offering desired benefits, and why better than competing behaviors. Common questions and methodologies included: what are the major reasons for hesitancy to adopt behavior? You give me reviews and summary of research and findings related to barriers. What option is most likely to lead to a campaign with the highest potential behavior change? Again, a review and summary of current research findings related to desired benefits or new ones that you conduct because you need to. Which of the following statements would make you most likely to consider doing this behavior? Well, based on barriers and benefits, you draft several potential positioning statements and then discuss in focus groups and online discussion boards. A campaign to increase the sales of broccoli versus kale, they used some research, crowdsourcing, that revealed that consumers typically saw broccoli as soggy, brown, squishy, and smelly. A campaign positioning broccoli as less pretentious than kale helped rank broccoli as number 10 versus kale number 75 in terms of ranking. And now we enter step 7, when we will be developing strategies for product, price, place, and promotion. So starting with product, this will involve decisions regarding core product and actual product. Research has to help us figure this out. What is the desired benefit, and what goods and services would help? Questions to identify the core product would be ones like, what would be in it for you personally to do this behavior? A methodology could be qualitative methods, such as focus groups, and potentially then a quantitative survey to identify the most significant ones. For the actual product, what is some product, a good or service, that would make it more likely you would do this? Again, qualitative methods might figure out the potential ones, and a quantitative survey could identify those most significant to be developed or promoted. An example of a product that was improved and created much better results was in pedestrian deaths in Kirkland, Washington, where there had been 62 deaths or injuries recorded in crosswalks, and they developed a 2007 campaign. Interviews determined these following barriers. What are the flags for? The holder is too hard to use. I feel safe. And by the way, there were no flags available. So the old flags became redesigned. You can see on the far right that it took care of most of those barriers. It's clear what it's for. It was easy to get out of a bucket, and there were many more than that in there. That's just a picture of when there was only one flag. This research made this change happen. They went in 2007 to 2008, 64% increase in flags. Usage levels went up from 11% to 18.5%, a 68% increase. Research in step 7.2, price, helps figure out which of the following would be the most motivating. A monetary incentive, like a reward, a non-monetary incentive, like a personal recognition, a monetary disincentive, like laws and fines, or non-monetary disincentives, like feelings of embarrassment. The first thing you would want to do would be to go back to your audience insights research and determine what is relevant for monetary incentives, non-monetary incentives, monetary disincentives, and non-monetary incentives. In other words, what were some of the barriers and benefits and motivators that would relate to those four categories? In terms of methodology, first, qualitative methods such as focus groups, online discussion board, or several one-on-one interviews to narrow and or refine this list. Then, potential strategies tested and prioritized in a quantitative survey designed to test and prioritize these potential strategies. It should be noted at this point that this could be one section of a quantitative survey that is used to test drafts of each of the 4P intervention strategies, so price would just be one of them. A research study in Australia was to help increase organ donations from 33%. They used messages based on insights, some relative to the price tool, some not. Did you tick the organ donor box on your driver's license? If you said yes to a life-saving transplant, have you said yes to being an organ donor? There are 1,400 Australians waiting for a life-saving transplant. You can help end the wait. Number 4, a transplant saved my life. And number 5, one organ and tissue donor can save more than 10 lives. Which of these were the most motivating? The research that was conducted in part by Department of Health and Human Services, Donate Life Victoria, and Vic Rhodes and the Behavioural Insights team from the UK, who advised on this trial design, determined that winning message was number 5. One organ and tissue donor can save more than 10 lives. A perfect example of a non-monetary incentives. And trial results were really promising. The ratio of those registering for organ donation after clicking through has increased by 43% in our new trial. Our third P, place, is one to determine what is the best location and time of day. A research to help us figure this out. One to perform the desired behavior, and one to access any goods and services. What would be the best location and best time of day? Common questions to help determine this begin with, like, perform the desired behavior. You would ask, what would an ideal place or way be for you to do this? Then, to access tangible goods and services, a question like, where would it be most convenient for you to get these? And what time of day or day of the week would be most convenient for you? Methodologies would be the same. For first, there would be qualitative methods such as focus groups, online discussion board, or several one-on-one interviews to narrow and or refine the list. Then, potential strategies tested and prioritized in a quantitative survey designed to test and prioritize these potential strategies. And as noted before, this could be one section of a quantitative survey used to test drafts of each of the 4 potential intervention strategies. An example in Utah of a case that was used to test a strategy to increase admissions to shelters. In the early 1990s, they tested this model called Housing First, where you're not required to abandon drug use, accept treatment, or accept support services. In 2015, this ease of access was declared a victory, with the population of chronically homeless people dropped by 91% in Utah. Our promotion strategy will be inspired by research that will test potential messages, messengers, and creative elements, and to research to select communication channels. Common questions to zero in on messages and messengers would be things like, what could someone say to you that would make this more likely? What individuals would be most influential? In terms of methodology, qualitative methods like focus groups and crowdsourcing to identify these potentials, and then include them in a part of a quantitative survey testing all draft 4Ps. In terms of creative elements, which of the following would get your attention and increase your interest? Qualitative methods such as focus groups to get reactions, to draft creative elements, and then finalize. And then communication channels, what are the best ways for you to learn and hear more? Review of secondary data related to the priority audience media habitats, and then finalized in a survey. Research to inform a Washington state campaign to increase COVID-19 vaccination rates. One of the research conducted was to figure out who would be a trusted messenger. They did statewide polling with 1,000+ interviews, a qualitative study with 120, one-on-one interviews in 15 languages, and a market research online community and focus groups. The findings were inspirational, with data shared by trusted experts from medical communities, pediatricians sharing with parents and kids about safety, and real stories such as, I think it's very important for me to get the shot to be around my grandkids. I'd like to see them as often as I can. Step 8, what research would you use to develop your evaluation plan, would include things like measuring internal data, and then you would use outcomes to be measured, most often quantitative and observation surveys and internal data and tracking metrics to measure the following. The evaluation plan, of course, doesn't report on these, but it identifies those that will be included in the evaluation research. One evaluation plan called for, in 2016, for a pilot campaign to test strategies used to decrease the use of alcohol by boat skippers. The actual then evaluation that was conducted showed it was the first seafarer without a drowning because it used the same thing we use about decreased use of alcohol by boat skippers, designated skipper. Research to create a budget plan primarily includes reviewing internal data to estimate the 4 Ps, evaluation, and staff-related costs to your plan. If it exceeds the budget, you may do secondary and one-on-one research for additional funding sources or conduct a pilot to help justify costs, such as in the following one pilot test in Cambodia to determine if a revised product to increase anemia would justify the added cost. Determined they tried a lucky fish instead of a chunk of iron to help reduce anemia, and anemia virtually disappeared in villages where the iron fish was distributed, justifying the higher budget. Most questions to be answered relative to implementation or internal review of things, like what are we going to do, who will be responsible. But another opportunity is to conduct a small-scale pilot of a draft campaign with analysis comparing findings to a control group used to make any final revisions before a broad-scale implementation. One that I was aware of is that they did a campaign to get people to take the stairs instead of the elevator, and so they did a video that showed people dancing on the stairs, and it did increase the usage of the stairs.